Is that music? Like the three. Oh, I'm actually four. But we are not performing. So thank you everyone for being here. I think it's really essential what Nicole said, that in order to actually enact systemic change, it's a partnership between government, education, industry, and bringing people together for collective impact. And that's the work we've been doing over the last 2 years with many of the incredible people here in the audience. So this panel is really to talk about that and the intersections of those spaces and some of the things that we can do to work together to make some change. And how we can help each other to implement that change. So I'm going to start with introductions, and I'm going to let all these amazing humans introduce themselves properly. We'll just go from, I don't know if Stacey has an order for me. I'm really bad at following directions, just in general. So we're going to go ahead and start with Adam, who is the first person on my list as well. So Adam Fowler, go ahead and start and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about some of your current projects and the work you've been doing with all of us here.
Sure. So I'm excited to be here. I'm an economist by trade, but I'm super interested in the creative economy. We do a lot of policy work with leaders in education, in different levels of government. We work with industry as well to understand needs around skills and a whole lot of questions around workforce development. I'm excited to be here. There's a long history in California of the creative industries and creative work being kind of an outlier when it relates to government activity and action. You know, if you've ever had a residual check, if you've ever had a whole host of things in the way a lot of the creative industries work, a lot of that gets really wigged out in the systems at the state. So like when you go to make unemployment insurance claims, we saw it at the beginning of the pandemic, right? People weren't qualifying because residuals were. There's a whole lot there to unpack, and it matters. It matters for where the levers of government are pulled and utilized. It's like when you are urged to take the census, that matters because like everything in the federal government is fed through that kind of snapshot of the world. And so I'm excited to talk about how the work that everyone is doing can kind of map onto policy work where we need some system-wide change. The United States is kind of an outlier in terms of its lack of industry policy compared to Canada, the UK, and other places. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for these great leaders to really make change in the systems that oftentimes inadvertently impede kind of the work that Nicole and everyone is doing. So good to be with you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And Adam just rushed over here from the launch of his 2022 Otis report for the creative economy. So I'll have him talk a little bit about that work as we move forward. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Nancy. So Nancy, why don't you take some time and introduce yourself and some of the projects that you oversee and work you're doing.
Thank you, Allison. I'm so happy to be here. It's weird, though, to feel like I'm like the government, you know? How did that happen? I was an independent filmmaker, really. That's how I got, well, before that, I was a therapist, but that's a long story. But anyway, so I got into the film business, worked on independent films, and I saw what it was like to work where you're just going from job to job to job. You know, I mean, there was really no security in it at all. And that was in Chicago. I moved here, managed to get my days, got in the Directors Guild, and started working on movies. And anyway, to make a long story short, I didn't want to go out of town because I had a young son, and they offered me the job of consulting with the California Film Commission to start a tax incentive program to keep movies and television here in California because it was total runaway production. So I wrote the regulations for the first iteration of that. That was a lottery system that a lot of people did not like. So they changed it to another system, which is really based upon jobs. How many people are you employing on your film? And the films that are employing the most people, theoretically, get in the program. So that's the way the program is right now. We're actually in the third iteration of it. And with the third iteration, we started a career pathways program that I'm going to tell you about. We had a career readiness program in the previous program, and we're still doing that. So that's something else that might be of interest. And also, I hope to get in some of the ways that the program is really not working, and ways I think it could really help the creative economy in a much more impactful level.
Thank you, Nancy. And do you want to share your title with the audience briefly?
I really don't like this title, but it's deputy director. I don't know. I just feel like I should have epaulets or something. But that's my title.
Thank you. Yeah, that's actually a short one. In government, they give us really long job titles to where everything becomes an acronym. So thank you. And Erica, I'm going to go ahead and toss it to you.
Hi, I'm Erica Sable Flores. I am the executive director of the Latino Film Institute's Youth Cinema Project. I'm also still utterly confused about how I ended up here. But I was a filmmaker too. I have a master's in psychology and I'm a dancer, so I'm kind of like, now it makes sense. So the Youth Cinema Project, we teach filmmaking in the classrooms of public schools to children as young as 5th grade. And we run a super intense, very rigorous curriculum where the kids basically work the way that you would work in film school. So everybody gets to write a script, everybody gets to pitch, and then the kids select themselves the movies that they're gonna produce, and then they make teams around those movies, 3-4 teams, and then they produce these movies, act, direct, light, edit, grip, everything, and then they get to premiere their films at the Los Angeles Latino International Film Festival, which is also operates under the Latino Film Institute, and it's our festival, and it's a premier Latino festival where the kids get to come and show their films. What we're really focused on right now, and we're very fascinated by, is trying to start workforce development as early as middle school. And I know that sounds crazy, maybe, because like these kids don't have enough pressure already, but we launched recently our alumni program. And what that was every kid that's been through ICP and completed the program for 1 year in any grade, in middle school and over, gets to be part of alumni. And through alumni, we continue the work that we do in the classrooms outside, and we continue our missions, which is to connect them and plug them into the film industry if they choose to do that, right? And what we learned the hard way was that we were like, oh yeah, your alumni program, high school, ooh. And then when we try to start plugging kids into things, they were just not at the level, like at all. And we were just hitting all of they needed samples. And animation programs were asking for 4 samples. And these kids were like 16. So we were like, oh my God, that's crazy. What are we gonna do about it? And so what we're trying to do right now, and I would really love it if this gets everyone thinking about this, is that we need to start early. We need to start early. Like, kids need to start taking themselves seriously, learning how to be professionals, learning how to talk, how to make eye contact, how to like be a full human. Because if you get to 18 and you think you're gonna catch up, then it's not gonna happen. And we learned that the hard way. And so we were like, we have to bridge this. We have to do it. And so in my work recently, I'm just like screaming through the roofs at everyone who listened to me. Is like, you have to help early, because we have to do it. If we don't do it, nobody's gonna do it. And then they get to high school, we're gonna lose them because they're not ready for workforce and they're not ready for college. So that's what I don't sleep at night at the moment about. And yes.
Thank you. So one of the things that Erica said is near and dear to my heart. Well, actually, everything you said is near and dear to my heart as a lifetime educator. But really this idea, we've got like such interesting representative panel here of multi-levels and the tiers of collaboration that need to happen, right? All the way from state government to boots on ground. And so our next panelist, Gabriel, will talk a little bit about his work with Arts for LA and some of his nonprofit interfacing, and then we'll just jump into the questions.
Hello, everyone. Hendiahe Iamenduech. That means hello, everyone, in Purepecha. I am a sociologist by trade. I am an artivist by necessity. And I am usually the person in the background chilling, I do a lot of work to create spaces for others to have a voice, especially through art. Right now, I'm leading the Creative Jobs. This is going to be a long acronym. The Creative Jobs Collective Impact Initiative. Boom. Essentially, to create new living wage jobs we have a number, 10,000 by 2030 in Los Angeles County. And that is a cross-sectoral kind of initiative. And we're looking really to fill in the gaps of why there's been this silo, right? Why we haven't created the infrastructure to support young people. For myself, I came up in the arts sector very non-traditionally. I learned on the streets. I came from the streets. I grew up in a foster home, went through houselessness, went through college, navigated all of that, and processing the trauma through dance. So the vehicle of dance really was that motivator for me, the thing that saved my life. I actually have 3 back injuries too. That dance really was kind of like the buffer between making sure I was still alive, right? So it's like some of that lived experience combined with the advocacy that I've done across the years really put me into this space to also support the voices of others. And I know that I'm here today because I really take to heart the stories of the communities that I represent. And I often say that I am here to elevate and work with the communities that I serve, not work for the communities that I serve. So when Arts for LA came knocking, right, we were actually in a conversation about some of the similar issues, and they're like, hey, you seem like a perfect person to join our work in the arts advocacy space. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm operating in this place of arts advocacy, nonprofit, and also my lived experience to really elevate and invite you all in, right? That's what I'm here for.
Thank you. And I think we're going to go back to you to talk a little bit more about that initiative as a starting point. But one of the things that, just for some context for the audience, there's been this silo in the arts world between arts jobs and entertainment jobs. And part of the work we're all doing is really to dismantle that silo and marry the two and help people understand there are careers for artists beyond traditional means, beyond painting. And this was actually a conversation we had at Comic-Con around, well, what if I learned that in my painting classes in high school, I could have been a concept artist? I didn't even know that was a thing. Like my whole career trajectory would have been different because I was really passionate about visual art as well as dance. But we don't teach that in a regular way, right? And so one of the work of Arts for LA is really trying to help create this bridge between the arts and careers in the arts across industries. And so I want you to talk a little bit about that initiative, if you don't mind, and maybe if possible, connect it back to the Creative Workforce Act, if you have or want to, or I can actually jump to Adam for that one.
Okay.
Go start with Arts for LA, and then I'll toss it to Adam to talk a little bit about that.
I wasn't I'm just kidding. Yeah. Okay, you got it. So the Creative Jobs Collective Impact Initiative really is the cross-sectoral partnership, right? We currently identified different partners to represent different sectors, right? We have labor, we have education, we have small nonprofits, and we also have government, right? Not here, but yes, government. And we're also looking to just build from this place of creating these jobs in a way that's not just saying we're going to create 10,000 jobs and kind of put them into the field, right? But we want it to be scalable. So the cross-sectoral partnerships is really that look at, what are we missing? How can we address the things that have been going or missing, right? What has been missing, right? Because it's not about anything being wrong, but what has been missing. And this ties into a lot of the policy advocacy that Arts for LA has done, which is on everything from Senate Bill 1116, which is like the payroll reimbursement for small arts nonprofits to make sure that they can hire independent contractors, right? So there's things like that have been passed but are not funded. And then there's also the Senate Bill 628, right? Which is to create a creative workforce. I'm sure this is more Adam's specialty, but essentially to create a training program, 12 to 14 months, kind of paid to learn in the creative sector as a creative, paid to learn, make it part of, it already got voted on, right? So it's already there. It's just also needing that additional support and funding.
So before I toss it to Adam, just a little more context on SB 628. So Senator Ben Allen passed a bill called the Creative Workforce Act of 2021, and it was signed into law by Newsom, and it was a collaboration between California Arts Council and the California Workforce Development Board to try and figure this out. And this is something that I think our only existing program that incentivizes employers for workforce development is the tax credit program. So this particular program did a couple things. One, it established creative workforce as a statewide workforce priority, which was huge for all of the career technical education space that I live in, which often eliminates arts access in rural communities because it's not a regional workforce priority, right? And everything's, LA's fine, but what about those kids in Humboldt County? So this kind of like leveled the playing ground, creating a statewide workforce priority, and that was an unintended consequence of that bill. And great, it changed my work drastically, but it is unfunded. And so I'm going to toss it to Adam a little bit to talk a little bit more about this need, because one of the biggest challenges in BRIC is living proof that we can change a system through the formal traditional means, through registered apprenticeship, but it is so hard to get employers to sign on, because how do we demonstrate and prove that there is an economic ROI on the social impact? And this is something we'll go into in our breakouts, but Adam, I'm going to go ahead and toss it to you to talk a little bit about your work with the Otis report, some of the findings, and then link it back to this topic.
Yeah. So what the old saying, what gets counted counts, I think, or some version of that, that's really kind of ultimately, from my lane, like a really important theme. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, there are so many examples in the way things were counted, right? So like in the 1990s, because take, for example, a traditional film set, you've got an entertainment partners or some sort of third-party payroll person, right? That company is the same as a deco. It's filed away the same as any sort of temporary services, right? That's under the umbrella of professional services. So for economics folks, that's like lawyers, accountants, things like that. In the late 80s, early 90s in the state, you would see these weird bumps in professional services in Los Angeles County, where, there would be a film shoot of like extras on boats down in Mexico, that when all of that processed through the system, people at the state level would say, oh, there's a surge in temporary hiring in professional services in Los Angeles County. It's not filed away under motion picture and sound. It's not filed away in these other places. That is just one of a lot of policy levers that really matter. You saw it at the beginning of the pandemic in the way hours, all these things are counted toward your ability. Thankfully, we had pandemic unemployment insurance for folks that were self-employed, 1099s, other forms of work. But these things matter in terms of social infrastructure, and they matter in terms of where policymakers see demand. So, if I was to ask you, the simplest of questions are not so simple in this space. If I was to say, how many artists are there in Los Angeles County? That can mean a whole host of things. People have multiple jobs, right? Some people do work for passion. Maybe they put it on Etsy. They do other forms. What's counted, what isn't, and where is their real income coming in, even if it's not just a W-2 engagement. And so in the Otis report, it's one of the reasons it's so valuable is we fold in estimates on gig engagement and self-employment, which in the arts are just, all of these are so different than every other industry sector on so many important ways. And so you just see time after time when community colleges think about what programs to invest for both skilling and upskilling, the below the line stuff where you don't have to go to art school and get $200,000 in debt, where you can learn a thing and start a job editing or doing other things. They're not seen as in demand because like the W-2 number is pretty stable and stagnant. And so understanding and advocating around folding in the different forms of work, this becomes more important. It's becoming more important over time, right? As platforms like change all of our, we've got a really weird system in terms of our healthcare being attached to our, there's a whole U.S. exceptionalism, wave the flag kind of energy that doesn't impact like, we do reports all the time where it's like, oh, we want to know the wages of below the line work or anime. Like, it's just a different thing when you are born in a country and have a national health care card, for example, versus like that being folded into your benefits. There's so many things that matter that the system here in California is really, it's operating in an economy that doesn't really exist anymore. So we have all these investments around manufacturing, healthcare, these things that people know and understand. But when it comes to where we're seeing lots of growth, it's often not captured and not forecasted correctly. And so we can't tap into federal or state funds oftentimes to like work on these programs. And it's really too bad because you see the retention rates. People are actually hungry, right? Like when you're doing things like foster care, formerly incarcerated folks, like there's always like, oh, our retention rate in these programs is like miserable. And you're like, well, yeah, you're pitching this thing as a miserable job. There's like a weird paternalism sometimes in workforce development where it's like, well, I guess you got to have the terrible job. Like that's what we're going to train you for. And like that's just it's unnecessary. Especially in like a place like Los Angeles County where our population, the number of languages spoken at home, for example, when it comes to entertainment localization, is like an asset that we do not have in other jurisdictions around the globe. Yet that would never show up in anything anyone is investing in at any level to bring folks like, oh, you have 2 languages at home? Like, let's do like a 6-month on like audio engineering and like plug you in because we've got a ton of work where we don't have voice actors. We don't have like, that is just one tiny example. And it's compounded when there's like digital disruption as well. Like we've got 2 things at once. One, that, it was siloed. You think about it at the United States level, where do we think policy making comes from for these things? It's not the Department of Labor. We're like, oh, I guess the NEA is like where we like, but that is tiny. And that is like doing other things. Like in other countries, there is the Department of Digital, Entertainment, Sport, etc. Like we just don't have any of that. And so it just comes, it's downstream of like, we don't even know what we don't know so much of the time. And so that is one of the big things, like in this conversation, the industry employer side is so important to help bubble these conversations up to state legislators. Like no one wants to be like anti-motion picture, right? Like that's an easy, we can cut the ribbon, put the golden shovel in the ground. Like that's a good one. They don't like, but we need to get in the weeds. It's not just always cutting the ribbon. It's like, oh, actually like there are different ways to report out on things like gig work. Somebody mentioned, and I'll say this, like when we can't see what we're regulating, we get a lot of unintended consequences, right? We were all feeling good about like regulating Uber and Lyft. We were going to put these things on the ballot, right? All the good lefty, like we're like, yeah, these people, like that's where we were. But like what ends up happening is like now the regional theater playhouse like can't manage making everyone they contract with to put a production on. They can't turn them into W-2 folks. They don't have the infrastructure to do that. They contract. It raises a whole set of questions about intellectual property. Like in the past, when you were contract, like you still owned what you did. If you become, if you download the, legal Zoom employment contract, like even people that aren't like, thinking in an evil way, like accidentally, like might take someone's intellectual property. And so like that to me is the prime example of like, we think we're going to regulate ride shares. We don't at all, right? Because of a whole host of other things. And we accidentally sabotage the community theater. And like, that is still where we are right now. Like community theaters are struggling. And like, to me, that the data person is like, like it's just so heartbreaking. And you, like for all of these jobs, like, Alice at the Department of Education, like she's hamstrung when these things aren't counted. And so, we're trying to bring together like employers as well, because like, thankfully we passed some funding for arts in, you're talking about middle school and high school, like that has been a desert in California. We're laughable when I, calculate the per capita on the art. Like, it's kind of unintuitive. like how low in terms of per capita around arts education we are. But we are. And, you know, it's like, where exactly, when we talk about, when we go accept our Oscar and we say, I'm going to sign a diversity, like, I need the people below the line to look like how is my question. Like, I love it, but like, there is no infrastructure to
Yeah.
like do that.
And Adam, I wanted to, so AB 5 is the bill Adam was referencing, for those of you who aren't familiar with that, which was an independent contractor restriction. Essentially, you have to pass an ABC test in order to be considered a contractor. So all of our independent artists really struggled from that. The other thing he's referencing is just crucial, and we were going to get into the weeds with this, but I don't feel like it's the right time, but definitely reach out to me because I'm going to start a committee. But all of the code sets that we collect economic and workforce data do not have any connect. Like, we literally in the state of California do not know the impact of the film industry on our state economy from our economic data. There are no codes that match the actual jobs. The jobs are coded incorrectly because of the payroll companies and the things Adam was discussing. So these are some of the deep issues that we've kind of uncovered through this work. And I am going to start a committee to try and get the codes updated at the federal and state level. And please reach out to me if you want to be part of that work, because what they need is employers. Because the data that Nicole collected on her spreadsheet of doom around like, there's no way we would have gotten that data if Nicole wasn't crazy and loved spreadsheets, right? And like knows a lot of artists. So the reality is that it's going to take a village. And I think that is some of the stuff Adam talks, about in his high level economic speak, is such stuff that we can change. Like, we can totally change it. And it's just going to take a lot of collaboration. And Nancy, I want you to talk a little bit about the work you've done to actually make these changes, because your program right now is, I think, one of the only really kind of like codified programs that we have in place that does incentivize employers in a way that's kind of it doesn't exist in games, it doesn't exist in animation, it exists in live action, but how do we learn from that and see the wins? And so can you share a little bit about that? And just so for time's sake, I think we're at 10 minutes total left for our panel, so it's okay, don't worry.
Unplug me, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'll try and be brief then. But basically, and I'm going to refer to these cards because I can't remember numbers to save my life. So far, the projects in the tax credit program, we've had over 600 projects in the program, spending almost $20 billion in the state of California, and we only allocated $2.5 billion. Okay, that sounds like a lot, but when you consider your return on investment, 25 billion tax credits allocated, almost 20 billion spent in California. So we're creating a lot of jobs, definitely. And one of the best parts of my work is when somebody comes into my office and says, a husband and a wife, and say they haven't been together for 5 years because the husband has been working in Louisiana or Georgia, and they pass in the night. He's just never home because there's no jobs for him here. So it's a little program. It doesn't sound that little, but it really is. $330 million for each fiscal year for 5 years. Now that sounds like a lot, but New York just raised their tax credit amount to $700 million a year. And the terms of their tax credit are much better than ours. California has this thing, like, we're California. We don't have to compete. Like, everybody's here. Everybody wants to be here. Like, we don't need to participate in this. And finally, when Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor, he realized, like, something had to be done. So cut to, what am I doing about it? So in addition to making sure that $330 million a year is spent on shows that create the most jobs, I've been kind of advocating for the independents, like, the entire time. The independents are not at the table. They're studios and streamers, and it's, their interests that they're concerned about. And the independent world is really where a lot of artists get their start and where people get their start in the industry. We have a show in our program, which you might have seen, called Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I don't know if it would have gotten made, particularly never in California, if we hadn't given it a tax incentive. So I feel like there is an arts program going on, and I'm constantly trying to keep everybody's hands off the independents, because there's enough regulations around what you have to do to get in this program that they keep piling on. And I'm like saying, hey man, I was an independent filmmaker. I don't have anybody to deal with all this stuff. You know, I'm just trying to make a movie. So part of that is my job. The other part is what I alluded to you before. There's a career readiness program, which is exposure to jobs in the industry. You know, everybody knows director, writer, producer, cinematographer, but there's thousands of jobs, particularly in the creative economy, particularly in visual effects and animation and gaming. And every year I give a report about how this sector of the economy is the only growing sector in the motion picture industry, and nobody pays any attention to it. It's very frustrating. I just feel like we're incentivizing shows to film here in California, but we need to incentivize the work as well. And the work is growing in this gaming, animation, and visual effects sector, and we're not incentivizing. We're the only major production center in the world that doesn't have its own visual effects and tax incentive program. And that could be visual effects, animation, and gaming. I don't know how far they could go with it, but it's so short-sighted, it drives me crazy. I could really talk a lot about it. If anyone wants to talk to me about it, you can talk to me later. I don't want to take up too much more time, but I'm real passionate about that. And we also have a career pathways program where we work with training providers, one of which teaches basic crafts, and then the individual goes through all the requirements and eventually gets their union card and gets into the union. And that, and our program is for individuals from underserved communities. And so we work with all kinds of people. They get their shot. And so far, I had some statistic I was going to wave at you. In terms of the career pathways program, I think like over 100 people have gotten their industry cards from one particular program. So we're very happy about that.
Thank you. And just last words on how many billions of dollars are spent on VFX outside of California. Do you have that on your notes? Because they just did a scan. The Film Commission did. Oh. Your visual effects scan.
Yeah, well, visual effects spending worldwide just this year is probably $8.2 billion, and it's estimated to grow in the year 2025 to $10.5 billion. And California gets a very minuscule amount of that because you can do visual effects anywhere in the world.
Thank you. And Erica, I'm going to toss it to you and for the kind of final thoughts around all of these things, because as the independent filmmaker and the boots on the ground and bringing kids up into this space and hearing all of these different challenges, I just wanted to get your thoughts and ideas.
So something that what Adam said about, you know, because we can scream till we're blue in the face to the studios and the world and everyone who's not being focused on diversity and should do better, and they should, and we should scream. However, that's real. Like, the infrastructure's not there. And why? Because you say, okay, they're not making an effort. They're not looking. We're here. Okay. So then we show up, right? And I'm going to tell you, as a person of color, I'm going to tell you right now, I have seen some hot mess. Like, I have seen, and I'm going to be real, like, I have seen some people get to the moment because through all the work of all of us, we got you there, and then you just, like, are a hot mess. And you know why? Because it's not really your fault. Like, you ended up in the school that had no resources, and the teachers were overworked. Nobody held you up to high expectations. And now you're scrappy because that's what we do, right? Like, people of color is like, we're scrappy. We're going to grit it out and we're going to do it. But the reality is, like, we get to these opportunities and some people are ready, but some people are not ready. So that to me is, like, super important because, like, we have to do all of this policy work and all of it, but we also have to just be like, let's just figure out all the holes and, like, really, my call would be to everybody, which I know is exhausting. But it's like, if you have an inch of bandwidth, if you have an inch of bandwidth to, like, look around and help somebody, just get a little better at something, right? Like, work on some skill that is going to get them a little better. I think that's super important because then, you know, we always say at the Latino Film Institute when we work with people, because we work with adults in the same way, right? Like, don't be a hot mess. Like, do this, do that. I'm like, you can't give them an inch. You can't give them an inch. You have to show up and you have to be 100% on your game so that nobody can be like, oh, yeah, those people are not ready, you know? So that was one thing that was very interesting to me. The other thing is you mentioned the actual ROI on social impact, right? So I start my conversations when somebody, I'm talking about sponsorships and grants and whatever and funding, especially when I talk to studios and industry. And they're like, I'll get the DEI department, whoever, and they're like, okay, how many kids are we impacting and what is the cost per kid and what is the thing, right? Because they have to do their numbers. I'm a hacker of all things because I'm a filmmaker infiltrating education and I'm like a business person infiltrating nonprofit. I just hack and shapeshift and that's how I do things. But when I talk to them, I'm like, okay, well, before I tell you the numbers, let me tell you one thing. It's like, if this one kid, Daniela, right, gets into this better program because we helped her a little bit, and then gets to go to CISA because she had all the samples, and then gets to go to a good college, she is gonna dramatically change her life, obviously, her parents' life, her children's life, and all of the generations down. So you tell me, what is the price of that? What is the cost per kid on that? And then, okay, and then I go, it's gonna be $1 million. So anyways, no, whatever, but I'm just saying, like, these things are like, this is how we have to talk about these things. These are people's lives. This is like lives of humans. It's like human rights. It's not like, anyways. So that was very important to me because I think that's something that we all have to just think about it that way. So I think we're out of time. I don't want to.
I know, and I wanted to hear Gabriel's feelings on all of these things too, and he's very.
About 3 minutes.
You have 3 minutes.
3 minutes, all right. Cool. So, thoughts on what we need to do. I'm an actions person, right? I got a lot of my experience going through injustice. I grew up Chicago and Los Angeles in both their foster care systems. Luckily, unluckily for me, both of the worst in the U.S. So going through that, I really had to understand how to rebuild my own family, my own lineage, my own financial stability. And I became a sociologist because I was just asking all those questions, like, how can I make the systems around me better for myself? How can I make the system, for instance, family, right, that was absent, how can I create that with people, with advocates, with people who look like me? And starting to build from that place, and essentially the absence of my childhood and being a sociologist, as a child asking all these questions, I was very almost isolated to problem solve on my own. And once it came to career readiness, once it came to college, access for others, I just had answers in my head. I had solutions in my head. And there was a point where after I had gone through a lot of stuff, I just said, okay, how can I ensure that whoever I speak with, I can understand their perspective and I can say, hey, I get it. You have your agenda, right? You got to make your bread at the end of the day. I go back home and I don't have any bread to make, so I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart, and I deserve to be paid too, right? So having those conversations with people, I think my foster care experience and my dance experience gave me both the lived experience, the data, the systems analysis, and then also just the direct way to engage with people to say, hey, if I can do this as someone who has come from a place of lack, and you have resources, you have a space, you have funding, you have different departments that you can activate in different ways, there's a nice way to marriage that, right? Not promoting marriage in the traditional way, but there's a nice way to bring that together, right? I'm Purepecha, reconnecting to my indigenous side. Marriage is a big thing. But yeah, like for me, honestly, with Arts for LA, we are calling in folks who are ready to take that direct action, do the Creative Jobs Collective Impact Initiative. We want to hear from you all, the things that you have been witnessing, the things that you have been advocating for. Oftentimes for us, myself, coming from this experience of like an independent artist, and also working in different nonprofit art spaces, I'm like, I had to work 6 jobs to dance. And I love to do that, but my body didn't, but my spirit didn't, but my heart didn't. So now I keep elevating just the way that anyone who can hear one little thing that resonates with you, Arts for LA really is calling you in to make sure we create that collective impact, build on the infrastructure. A couple of folks here on the panel are already involved with that work. And we have until 2030 to make it work. So come see me.
Thank you. And I'm gonna pass it to Nicole to do breakout rooms. I just want to see by show of hands who in the room was a dance or theater kid. I'm telling you, so many people in leadership that I know have that background. I was just curious. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Oh, and last thing. Arts for LA is part of a larger statewide group that we are trying to actually pull together all of the workforce programs that are out there called Entertainment Equity Alliance. Nicole, Adam, Nancy, and Eric, actually all of us are part of this. Mia Johnson and LA Arts and Culture. So if you want to get involved in that space, we're trying to just make things a little easier and more organized. And so we're going to, offer up some information on that. I'll let Nicole.
I've tricked you all. This is actually not a normal brick breakout session. You're all a committee right now. And we are going to be actually doing work that Adam and everybody needs. So we basically don't have a ton of time because that is how life goes. But we're going to be talking about if we could go to the next slide. And if you're not on the Wi-Fi, because I had no service in here, the Wi-Fi is open and free.